The drive back home that Friday evening felt as routine as ever. The tires hummed against the asphalt, the radio played a soft mix of classic rock, and the faint scent of coffee from my afternoon meeting still clung to my shirt. The familiar streets of Austin, Texas blurred past as I navigated through the evening traffic. The weekend ahead was the only thing keeping me sane after a grueling week of deadlines, emails, and endless meetings. My wife, Olivia, had texted me earlier, asking what I wanted for dinner. After the week I'd had, I craved something simple and comforting. Mac and cheese, I replied. It was her specialty, and the thought of it brought a small smile to my face. Olivia and I had been married for 10 years, and at 34, she was still the most beautiful woman I'd ever known. I was 37, and though life had its ups and downs, I thought we were solid, until that night. As I waited at a red light, my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I glanced over and picked it up with one hand, curious. It was a message from Olivia, a photo. I opened it, and my breath caught in my throat. The image was intimate, smooth skin, the curve of a shoulder, and the hint of lace. My heart skipped a beat. Before I could process what I was seeing, the photo vanished, replaced by the familiar 3 dots indicating she was typing. "Sorry, that wasn't meant for you," her message popped up. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. The words "not meant for you" echoed in my head like a broken record. What did she mean? My chest tightened, and my pulse quickened as I typed a response, trying to sound casual. "What was that?" I sent back, my fingers trembling slightly. The dots reappeared, lingering for what felt like an eternity. Finally, her reply came through, "Nothing, just something personal. Forget about it. Forget about it." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My mind raced with questions, and my heart pounded in my chest. The car behind me honked loudly, jolting me back to reality. The light had turned green. Tossing the phone onto the seat, I pressed on the gas pedal, but my thoughts were scattered. The image of that photo and the phrase "not meant for you" looped in my head. If it wasn't for me, then who was it for? By the time I pulled into the driveway, the setting sun cast long shadows across the yard. The warm light spilling through the blinds gave our house a golden glow, but for the first time, it didn't feel like home. I grabbed my briefcase and headed inside, my mind still racing. Olivia was in the kitchen, her blonde hair tied back in a messy bun, humming softly as she moved around. She didn't turn to look at me when I walked in. "Hey," she greeted me casually, her voice light but with a hint of strain. "Dinner's in the oven. How was work?" "Fine," I said, setting my things on the counter. My eyes stayed on her as she moved around the kitchen, her back turned to me. I wanted to ask her about the photo, about the odd message, but the words stayed lodged in my throat. Instead, I grabbed a bottle of water and leaned against the counter. "How about you? How was your day?" I asked, forcing a casual tone. She turned briefly, flashing a quick smile. "Busy. Just meetings back to back. You know how it is." Her phone was on the counter beside her, face down. My gaze flicked to it, and my stomach churned. "Anything interesting happen?" I pressed, hoping she'd slip up. She shrugged without looking at me, stirring something on the stove. "Not really. Same old stuff." The knot in my chest tightened. I wanted so badly to believe her, to dismiss the gnawing suspicion growing in my gut, but the image of that photo and her words "not meant for you" refused to let me. I studied her every movement, her calm demeanor, the practiced smile she wore when she finally turned to me again. "Everything okay?" she asked, a slight furrow in her brow. "Yeah," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just tired." That night, Olivia fell asleep quickly, her breathing steady and even. The dim light from the bedside lamp cast faint shadows on the walls, but I lay wide awake beside her, staring at the ceiling. The photo, the tone of her text, and the way she brushed it off, it all gnawed at me. Something felt off, and I couldn't shake the feeling that our life together was built on a lie. I glanced at her phone on the nightstand. It sat there, face down, as if taunting me. A rush of anger and fear rose in my chest, tightening like a vice. I knew I couldn't let this go, but for now, all I could do was lie there, wide awake, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on me. I'd never been one to snoop or invade someone's privacy, but tonight was different. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong. The unease gnawed at me, growing louder in my head until I couldn't ignore it any longer. Moving carefully, I slid out of bed, making sure the mattress barely shifted beneath me. Olivia stirred faintly, her hand brushing against the blanket, but she didn't wake. Holding my breath, I reached for her phone on the nightstand, clutching it tightly as I tiptoed out of the bedroom. In the faint glow of the living room, I sank onto the couch, the phone sitting heavy in my hand. My palms were damp, and my heart hammered against my ribs. A pang of guilt hit me. Snooping felt wrong, like crossing a line, but the need to know overwhelmed any hesitation. I stared at the screen for a long moment before my thumb finally moved, unlocking it with a soft click. Olivia had never bothered to change her password, and now I was in. I scrolled through her apps, my fingers trembling. Everything seemed pristine, too pristine. Her email, social media, even her photo gallery, all looked spotless. My stomach churned as I opened her messages, scanning through the conversations. Most were mundane, the usual chatter between friends and coworkers. But one thread stood out. The name saved on the contact was Jake, no last name. At first, the messages seemed harmless enough. The tone was casual, but there was something off. I skimmed through the recent texts until one stopped me cold, excited to shoot with you again next week. Let's aim for something even hotter this time. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. My eyes darted back through the thread, taking in the compliments about her energy and talent, mixed with details about dates, locations, and vague mentions of roles. It didn't make sense, not until I opened one message that contained a link. My stomach sank as I clicked it. The link led to a sleek, professional-looking website. For a moment, I convinced myself it was something innocuous, an acting gig, maybe. But as I scrolled, dread pooled in my gut. It was an adult site. My hand shook as I navigated the menu, each tap on the screen feeling heavier than the last. A list of featured performers appeared, and then I saw her. Olivia. Her face stared back at me, her confident smile identical to the one she had given me just hours earlier in the kitchen. It was unmistakable. My wife. My chest tightened as I clicked on her profile, unable to stop myself. A different username appeared next to her picture, but there was no denying it was her. Videos filled the screen, dozens of them. Each thumbnail was explicit, and I felt my mind reel as I realized the extent of what I was seeing. I clicked on one, my hand moving almost involuntarily. The video began to play, and within seconds, I regretted it. There she was, Olivia, in a room I didn't recognize, surrounded by strangers. Men, mostly. Black and brown men dominated the scenes, their presence unmistakable. Her laughter rang out, her movements brazen, and her words laced with a confidence I'd never seen in her before. It was her, but not the woman I thought I knew. My stomach churned violently, and I forced myself to close the video, slamming the phone down onto the coffee table. I stood shakily, the room spinning around me. My knees felt weak, and the air seemed heavier with every breath I took. The life I thought I knew, the marriage I had believed in, it was all crumbling around me. Leaning against the wall for support, I tried to process what I had just discovered. Olivia, the woman I'd shared nearly a decade of my life with, had been living a double life. Every little thing I had brushed off, the late-night meetings, the new perfume, the times she dismissed my questions, came flooding back, now painted in a new, painful light. This wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation. A public lie, laid bare for anyone with an internet connection to see. The phone buzzed again on the table, breaking the suffocating silence. My eyes darted to the screen, where another message from Jake had appeared: "You were incredible last time. Can't wait to see you on set again soon." I clenched my fists, anger bubbling to the surface and threatening to consume me. It wasn't just anger, it was rage, humiliation, and heartbreak, all tangled into one. My chest heaved as I fought to think clearly, to figure out what to do next. One thing was certain, though: I couldn't unsee what I just discovered, and I couldn't pretend it hadn't happened. The man I had been just an hour ago, the husband who trusted his wife without hesitation, was gone. What remained was a hollow shell of that man, struggling to stay upright under the weight of betrayal. I sank onto the couch, burying my face in my hands as the enormity of it all pressed down on me like a tidal wave. And Olivia, she was only a few feet away, sleeping soundly, completely unaware that her carefully woven web of lies was unraveling right beneath her nose. The early morning hours were eerily quiet, the kind of silence that felt oppressive. The only sound in the house was Olivia's steady, peaceful breathing. It was maddening, knowing she was resting so easily while my world had just imploded. I sat on the couch, my eyes fixed on her phone lying on the coffee table. My mind buzzed with a toxic cocktail of rage, humiliation, and an unnerving sense of calm clarity. This wasn't a situation for shouting matches or confrontations. Olivia had built an entire life on deceit, hiding a part of herself from me and from everyone else. I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. Not this time. Instead, I picked up her phone again with cold determination. I started taking screenshots, messages from Jake, links to her profile, even thumbnails of the videos that had shattered my perception of her. My stomach churned as I went through it all, but I forced myself to keep going. I needed every piece of proof. Once I was done, I sent all the evidence to my own phone, ensuring I had a record of everything. Then, I opened a drawer in the living room and pulled out a small box I'd ordered years ago but never thought I'd actually use. It was a set of discreet surveillance equipment, tiny cameras and voice recorders. I had initially bought them for home security. Now, they had a different purpose. I placed the cameras in strategic spots: the living room, the kitchen, even the bedroom. The voice recorders were tucked into hidden corners, spots where they'd remain undetected but pick up every sound. It felt invasive, violating even, but I reminded myself that Olivia had already obliterated every boundary of trust. This wasn't about fairness anymore, this was about survival. By the time I finished, the first rays of daylight were breaking through the blinds. I grabbed a piece of paper and jotted down a note, keeping it short and emotionless: "Olivia, I know everything. I've included proof so there's no denying it. Don't contact me. We're done. Good luck explaining yourself to everyone." I left the note on the kitchen counter alongside printed screenshots of her messages and the link to her profile on the site. For a moment, I stood there, taking in the house, the life we had built together. The photos on the walls, the furniture we had carefully picked out, the kitchen where we'd shared countless meals, all of it felt hollow now, as if it had been part of a cruel joke I was only just starting to understand. With my packed bag in hand, I walked out of the house without looking back. The drive to my old apartment felt like I was drifting through a surreal dream. I hadn't set foot in the place since Olivia and I had moved in together, and it felt strange going back. The apartment was small and cramped, but it was mine, a space where her lies couldn't reach me. Thankfully, the landlord had kept it as a short-term rental, and I still had a key. Inside, the air was stale, and the walls were bare, but for the first time that night, I felt a faint glimmer of relief. It wasn't much, but it was freedom. Dropping my bag on the floor, I collapsed onto the couch, exhausted but far from at peace. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me back to the moment. It was time to take the final step. With a few taps, I forwarded the link to Olivia's profile to everyone close to her, family, friends, anyone whose number I had. Her parents, her sister, her best friends, they all received the same message: thought you might want to see what Olivia has been up to. I didn't add anything else. The evidence spoke louder than any explanation could. As I hit send, a grim sense of satisfaction settled over me. She had spent years hiding this from everyone, living a double life without consequence. Now, the truth would be out in the open, and she'd have no one to blame but herself. I lay back on the couch as the sun climbed higher in the sky, its warm light filtering into the room. My thoughts raced, torn between the devastation of what I had lost and the small comfort of knowing I had taken control of what I could. The hours crawled by as I sat in my old apartment, the silence broken only by the occasional hum of the refrigerator or the distant sound of traffic outside. My phone buzzed a few times, messages from friends and family who had received the link. Some were shocked, others angry, and a few even tried to defend Olivia, but I ignored them all. I didn't have the energy to explain myself. The evidence spoke for itself. Around mid-morning, I opened my laptop and connected to the hidden cameras I had installed in the house. The feed was sharp, showing the quiet kitchen where I had left the note and the damning evidence. The house was still, Olivia still asleep, unaware of what was waiting for her. The anticipation clawed at me, and I alternated between pacing the cramped living room and sipping coffee that had long gone cold. My stomach twisted with a mix of anger and dread. Finally, around 9 a.m., I saw movement on the screen. Olivia shuffled into the kitchen, her blonde hair a mess and still wearing the oversized shirt she slept in. She poured herself a cup of coffee, completely oblivious to the note sitting on the counter. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart pounding as I watched her take a sip, then pause when her eyes landed on the folded paper. She picked it up, her brow furrowing as she read the short message. Her expression shifted, confusion melted into surprise, then hardened into something colder. Her lips pressed into a tight line as she scanned the screenshots and the printed link. Setting the note down, she grabbed her phone. I watched as her fingers flew across the screen, likely opening her messages or checking her profile on the site. Her face paled, and for a moment, I thought I'd finally see the panic, the shame, the guilt. But then she laughed. It wasn't a laugh of nervousness or fear, it was bitter, hollow, and sharp. The sound sent a chill through me. She tossed the papers back onto the counter, muttering something under her breath. I adjusted the volume on the voice recorder to catch her words. "This is what he thinks will hurt me?" she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "Doesn't he realize I've been doing this for the money? This was never about him." I froze. Her words cut deeper than I expected. For the money. That's what this was about? The woman I had loved, trusted, and built a life with had reduced everything to financial transactions. She began pacing the kitchen, muttering to herself. All that whining about work stress, his little pity parties over deadlines, and here I am, paying the bills half the time. She sneered, laughing again, this time sharper, meaner. "If he thinks this is going to break me, he doesn't know me at all." I leaned back in my chair, her words slicing through me like knives. I had braced myself for guilt, maybe anger or denial, but not this, not the cold indifference, not the smug arrogance of a woman who felt no remorse for shattering everything we had built together. I stared at the screen as she continued ranting, her voice growing louder with every word. "Let him sulk. Let him cry. He's the one who's been living in a fantasy this whole time, not me. This is my life, my decisions." Her words echoed in my head, each one a fresh wound. Olivia had always been confident, but this was something else. It was calculated, cruel, and utterly detached from the life I thought we had shared. My chest tightened as I closed the laptop, her voice still ringing in my ears. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a complete dismissal of everything we had been to each other. And I didn't know how to process it. I had barely sat back down when the doorbell rang. The sharp chime cut through the quiet apartment and jolted me out of my thoughts. My stomach twisted. I didn't need to guess who it was. Cautiously, I walked to the door and opened it. There she was, Olivia, standing on the threshold, arms crossed and face flushed. Her usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by a mixture of anger and something else, panic. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she spat, shoving past me into the apartment without waiting for an invitation. "Why would you send those videos to my family? To everyone?" Olivia's voice was sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. I closed the door slowly, leaning back against it as I faced her. She stormed back and forth across the small living room, her hands flying in frantic gestures. Her anger filled the space, but I didn't flinch. "Why?" I repeated, my voice steady and cold. "Because they deserve to know the truth, just like I did." She stopped in her tracks, spinning to glare at me. "The truth? The truth is you've ruined my life. Do you have any idea what you've done?" A bitter laugh escaped me as I shook my head. "Ruined your life? Olivia, you've been lying to me for years, sneaking around, making who knows how much money from this filth. And you think I'm the problem?" She threw her hands up, her voice dripping with contempt. "Oh, spare me your self-righteous crap, Michael. Do you think I wanted to do this? I didn't have a choice. Do you even know how hard it's been to make ends meet while you sit there playing the martyr? This was for us, for our future." Her words were so outrageous I almost laughed again. But instead, I stared at her, disbelief etched on my face. "For us? Don't insult me, Olivia. You didn't do this for us. You did it for yourself, for the money, for the thrill, whatever excuse you need to justify betraying me." Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I thought she might break, maybe cry. But instead, her expression hardened, and she lashed out. "You're pathetic, Michael. Always playing the victim. You couldn't handle the pressure, so I stepped up. And now you're punishing me for it." "Stepped up?" My voice rose, the anger boiling over. "You call this stepping up? Lying to me, sneaking around, dragging our marriage through the mud? That's not stepping up, Olivia. That's cowardice." She stepped closer, her face mere inches from mine, her eyes blazing with fury. "You think you're so noble, don't you? Like you've never made a mistake. Newsflash, Michael, you're a boring, predictable man who couldn't even see what was happening right under his nose." Her words struck like a slap, but I refused to let her see the sting. Straightening, I glared back at her, my voice low and firm. "You're right. I didn't see it. I didn't see the woman I married turning into a stranger. But now I do. And I'll make damn sure everyone else does, too." Her eyes widened at my words, the weight of them sinking in. For the first time since she walked in, she looked genuinely shaken. You won't get away with this," she stammered, her voice trembling. "You think you can just destroy me and walk away?" I crossed my arms, unmoving. "Destroy you? No, Olivia. You destroyed yourself. I'm just making sure the world knows who you really are." Moments later, she spun on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind her so hard the walls shook. I stood there in the silence, my chest heaving as the adrenaline began to ebb away. Her words lingered, sharp and venomous, but I shoved them aside. She was lashing out, trying to shift the blame, but I wouldn't let her. I walked back to the couch and sank down, staring at the blank wall in front of me. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had the upper hand. Let her rage. Let her scream. The truth was out now, and there was no taking it back. The sun dipped lower outside my apartment window, casting the room in a muted orange glow. I sat on the edge of the couch, my phone in hand, waiting. My conversation with Olivia replayed in my mind, her biting words echoing. But I reminded myself, this was only the beginning. I wasn't backing down. The phone buzzed in my hand, jolting me from my thoughts. Robert's name flashed on the screen. I answered immediately, my voice steadied despite the simmering tension. "Robert," I said, leaning forward. "What's the update?" He didn't waste any time. "Michael, I've initiated the freeze on all accounts. Effective immediately, she won't have access to any of the joint accounts or shared credit cards." A small wave of relief washed over me. It was a step, a small victory, but a crucial one. "Good," I said, my voice firm. "Let her try and fight. She'll find out soon enough that I'm not playing games anymore." As for her individual accounts, Robert continued, "That's a trickier process, but we've filed motions to investigate her financial activities if needed." I exhaled deeply, realizing I'd been holding my breath. Good. That's good. I don't want her using any money I've contributed to for her extracurricular activities. Robert's tone softened slightly. "Michael, I've reviewed the evidence you sent over. This isn't just a standard divorce case anymore. Depending on how she's been funneling money and what she's used it for, we could be looking at potential fraud." I nodded reflexively, even though he couldn't see me. "That's what I'm worried about. She's been living this double life for years, and I have no idea how deep it goes." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Have you thought about filing for divorce? If this is where things are heading, we should move quickly. It's best to establish your position and protect your assets before she has a chance to react." Hearing the word divorce out loud made my chest tighten. It was the logical step, the only step, but it still felt like a hammer blow. For a fleeting moment, memories of the early days of our marriage flickered in my mind, the laughter, the plans, the promises we'd made. That life felt like it belonged to someone else now, a distant echo of something irreparably broken. "I want to file," I said firmly, my voice steady despite the weight of the decision. "Whatever it takes. Just make sure she can't take another cent from me." "Understood," Robert replied without hesitation. "I'll start drafting the paperwork tonight. Given the evidence we have, we'll file for an at-fault divorce on the grounds of infidelity. That will give you a stronger position when dividing assets and could protect you from any spousal support claims." "Good," I said, my tone hard. "I don't want her getting a penny more than she deserves." There was another pause before Robert spoke again, his voice cautious. "Michael, you should prepare yourself for the possibility that she might retaliate. From what you've described, and based on the evidence, she doesn't seem like the type to go quietly." "I'm ready," I replied, my jaw clenching. "Let her try." When the call ended, I sat there for a moment, the phone still in my hand. Relief washed over me, but it was tinged with sadness. The accounts were frozen, the divorce was in motion, and I was finally taking back control of my life. But it also marked the end of something I had once believed in wholeheartedly. The woman I thought I knew, the life we had built together, it had all been a lie. The apartment was dark now, the only light coming from the faint glow of the city outside the window. The silence was heavy, but it was far better than the suffocating weight of her lies. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was standing on solid ground, even if it was still unfamiliar and unsteady. The battle wasn't over, but I had taken the first step. Now, it was only a matter of time before the rest of her world collapsed around her. The next few days passed in a blur. Olivia's world began to crumble faster than I had anticipated. The evidence I had sent to her family and friends had spread like wildfire. Her parents called me, their voices trembling with disbelief and anger. Her sister sent a long, tearful message, apologizing for not seeing the signs. Even her closest friends distanced themselves, some cutting ties with her entirely. Olivia's carefully constructed facade was unraveling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. I watched it all unfold from a distance, my emotions a tangled mess of anger, relief, and lingering sadness. I had moved into my old apartment permanently, and though it was small and cramped, it felt like a sanctuary, a place where her lies couldn't reach me. The surveillance cameras I had installed in the house continued to feed live footage to my laptop, and I checked them obsessively, waiting for the moment when Olivia would finally break. That moment came sooner than I expected. One evening, as I sat on the couch scrolling through the camera feeds, I saw Olivia pacing the living room, her phone pressed to her ear. Her face was flushed, and her voice was raised, though I couldn't make out the words through the audio feed. She looked frantic, her usual composure completely shattered. I adjusted the volume on the voice recorder, straining to hear what she was saying. "I don't care what they think," she shouted into the phone, her voice trembling with anger. "This is my life, and I don't owe anyone an explanation." There was a pause as she listened to the person on the other end, her expression growing darker by the second. "No, I'm not going to apologize. If they can't handle the truth, that's their problem. And Michael," she stopped abruptly, her voice breaking. "He's the one who did this. He's the one who ruined everything." I clenched my fists, my anger flaring at her words. She still couldn't take responsibility for her actions. She still blamed me for her downfall. But as I watched her, something unexpected happened. Her shoulders slumped, and she sank onto the couch, her phone slipping from her hand. For the first time, I saw a crack in her armor, a glimpse of the woman I thought I had known. She buried her face in her hands, her body shaking with silent sobs. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. Had I gone too far? Had I destroyed her completely? But then I reminded myself of the lies, the betrayal, the humiliation. She had made her choices, and now she had to face the consequences. The next morning, I received a call from Robert. "Michael, we need to talk," he said, his tone serious. "Olivia's lawyer has reached out. They're willing to settle, but they're demanding a significant portion of your assets. They're also threatening to countersue for defamation if you don't comply." I laughed bitterly. Defamation? They've got to be kidding. I have proof of everything. "I know," Robert replied. "But they're trying to intimidate you. They know you have the upper hand, and they're desperate. My advice? Don't back down. We'll fight this in court if we have to." "Do it," I said without hesitation. "I'm not giving her a single penny." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal battles and emotional turmoil. Olivia's lawyer fought hard, but the evidence I had gathered was undeniable. The screenshots, the links, the surveillance footage, it all painted a clear picture of her double life. The court ruled in my favor, granting me a full at-fault divorce and awarding me the majority of our shared assets. Olivia was left with nothing but the clothes on her back and the shattered remains of her reputation. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought I could finally move on and rebuild my life. But Olivia wasn't done yet. One evening, as I sat on the couch scrolling through the news, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello?" "Michael," Olivia's voice came through, soft and hesitant. "Thank you for picking up. What do you want, Olivia?" I asked, my tone cold and distant. She hesitated. "I wanted to say I'm sorry. I know I ruined everything, but I've been working on myself. I've changed. I realized how much I took for granted. I was hoping, maybe we could try again." I couldn't believe the audacity. My grip on the phone tightened as I fought to keep my voice steady. "You think a few apologies can erase what you did? The lies? The betrayal? The humiliation? I know I hurt you," she said quickly, her voice rising with urgency. But I was lost, Michael. I made mistakes, but I'm not that person anymore. Please, can't we at least meet and talk? Meet and talk. I repeated, my voice sharp with disbelief. Olivia, you didn't just make a mistake. You made a series of calculated decisions to deceive me. You lived a life that spat on everything we had, and now that it's all fallen apart, you want to crawl back like none of it happened? There was a pause on her end, and I could hear the faint hitch in her breath. I'm trying to make things right, she whispered, her voice trembling. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. You had your chance, Olivia. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them. I'm not giving you another opportunity to hurt me. Michael, she started, her voice breaking. No, I interrupted, my tone firm and final. We're done. We've been done. I've moved on, and you need to do the same. The silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably long before she spoke again, barely audible. I still love you. A bitter laugh escaped me. Love? You don't even know what that word means. I ended the call before she could say another word. My hands trembled slightly as I set the phone down. The conversation had stirred up something inside me, a complicated mix of anger, pity, and relief. Anger at her audacity to think she could undo the past. Pity for her desperation. And relief that I was no longer the man she could manipulate. That night, I sat on my balcony, gazing out at the glittering city lights. The past few months had been a slow but steady journey of healing, of rebuilding my life from the wreckage of her betrayal. Her apology, while far too late, served as a reminder of how far I had come. I had faced the worst of it, and I wasn't going to let her drag me back into her chaos. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I truly felt free.